Hi, my name is Dave Reske, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we focus on uncovering the myths of marketing and leadership with some of the world's most interesting people. And my guest today is Vinda Souza. Vinda is the CMO of Ref Assured. And before that, she was the VP of Corporate Communications at Employee Bridge, and she was also head of marketing at Catalent Technologies. Vinda, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dave. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes. Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time because you and I have discussed a really interesting and intriguing topic about AI. And while, a lot of people are talking about AI and ways to use AI to make themselves more productive or get more into it, use more of the technology. Conversation you and I have been having is about preserving humanity in an age of AI. And I'm totally intrigued by your thoughts on this. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say. So, you know, what do you think? Are we in danger of losing our humanity in the age of AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. And I think it's maybe somewhat unorthodox for a marketer to be very skeptical about the current use cases that we're embracing around AI, but I am. And I think part of the reason behind that is that I don't know that we have, as marketers, stepped back and strategically identified the problem that we're trying to solve. And I worry that we're starting to apply extremely powerful technology that is proliferating at a rapid pace to things that aren't actually problems at all. And at my company, I mean, we believe that technology should be accretive to the human experience. We are trying to make things more comfortable for our customers and help them focus more energies on things that give them joy and drive real value for themselves and their businesses and their stakeholders. And I don't necessarily know that we have approached the current slate of available AI marketing tools with that same approach, as an industry at least. And an example of that would be, it was in the headlines for a good reason. It aired during the Olympics, that Google Gemini ad around writing a fan letter to the track and field gold medalist from the U.S., Sydney Laverny, I believe her last name is. And I mean, it's a great concept, the idea of a young child who wants to write a letter to her idol and doesn't quite understand how to gather her thoughts and put the words down. And so her father is the person she turns to for advice on how to help her. That's all very believable, very heartwarming, very touching, thematically ties in perfectly to the idea of Olympic aspiration and children can be anything and they can grow up to dream big and achieve. And then it all kind of went off the rails because it made an assumption that something that is deeply personal and kind of almost part of your core identity, your soul, which is how you dream and what you want to achieve in your future, should be entirely usurped by machinery. And I don't think that, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, and it's very possible that I am just speaking for myself. I personally do not want to relinquish the things that give me great meaning and joy, one of which is writing, creative writing nonetheless, right? I also don't want to relinquish singing. I'm a musician. I don't want somebody to take over other things that bring me joy, like eating a fine meal or spending time with my kids or going for a nice drive in the countryside or hanging out on a beach. Like, these are things that aren't problems. They don't need to be solved for. They don't need to be automated away because they weren't pain points. And I think that we need to take a step back and identify what is actually making life less enjoyable and how can we fix that and use technology to make that better, more accurate, more easy, more effective, versus taking things that are fundamental to the human experience, like creativity, and wholesale replace it.
Yeah, that is such a powerful idea. And I love your example of the fan letter because that's something that's, especially from a child, that's something that should be very personal and human and coming in a child's voice. Um, is going to be probably more effective and more powerful than coming from a pre-written, canned, or AI written example. So I think what you're saying is that, by maybe taking an activity that's essentially human, the creativity of writing, and outsourcing it to a machine, we're losing something in humanity. But it feels like it's a little bit deeper than just a productivity argument you're making. I think you're making some argument that we're losing something about ourselves or our capabilities or our soul in some way by not exercising some of these creative elements that we have within ourselves. Is that where I hear you going?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. And I think, part of the genesis of that, and we can see it all around us. I mean, I see it in my own children. Um, the way we learn is evolving. And I'm not necessarily sure I would say that it's an effective way to learn right now. I mean, a core example of that is perhaps an over reliance on assistive technology before having potentially cultivated the fundamentals that allow us the wisdom and judgment to discern authenticity and accuracy. And I'll give you an example. So when I was in college at Tufts, I was a double major in English and French. And so that meant I was writing a ton of stuff. I had to read a novel a week for my English literature survey course, and I had to write an essay about the book that I read every Friday. And it was 2 hours of being in there, just, furiously writing in cursive, and then, pencils down, your hand in your paper, and you go. We had computers in our dorm rooms, and we would use those to type up essays at times, but we still had to, again, most of the time be taking notes by hand and then writing up our essays by hand. And I noticed now I was trying to take notes and write something longhand in a meeting, and I realized my hand started to hurt after a couple of minutes. And then I thought back to what it was like 20 years ago when I had to write these essays by longhand in cursive every day, essentially, and how I could have probably been writing for hours and wouldn't have felt it, wouldn't have even noticed it. And that's because I just don't write anymore.
Hmm.
I type everything, or I, write something on my phone. And that's why my neck is kind of hunched over, and why I always have shoulder pain, and why, my carpal tunnel is acting up. And sure, granted, that's probably just age. Either way, I worry about my children's generation and whether or not they're going to learn how to fundamentally exercise that degree of judgment and roll up your sleeves execution that helps to inform that ability to discern, you know, what is trustworthy and credible information.
Mm.
I don't think that we have to necessarily just watch this train go by. I mean, our education system is fantastic. I think that there's so many amazing fundamentals that they're learning in school. I personally am encouraging my kids to really embrace those and lean in. Like, don't turn to the calculator if you don't need to. Do it longhand. Show your work, show your math. Don't find the answer on the internet. Find the answer in a book. I
Mm.
mean, there are lots of think critically. Try to determine the right answer for yourself based on your own intelligence and do the research. Don't just take the shortest, easiest path forward because you're afraid to take the harder path. Take the shorter path potentially because you know what it's like to do it the long way. And it would be more enjoyable and productive if perhaps you were to embrace efficiency. But don't just kind of rely on that as a crutch. And that, I think, is a real opportunity for us as technologists to be able to develop software that, again, automates the mundane, but helps to elevate the human being things that are truly enjoyable, that require rapport, that generate and cultivate trust, that create that comfort and relationship building. And that's something I just don't see any sort of technology being able to replace as far as just how naturally humans can do it.
Yeah. So if you're losing the ability to even take notes, discern, what's in those notes, if you're using AI to kind of take your notes, and I've seen applications like this, and then put together all the notes and tell you what's important, and then maybe put together in the presentation on that, you're losing your ability to kind of think through that whole process. Um, and that could be a huge loss for us. I think I mentioned to you that I'm adjunct professor at Boston College. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that students have to do every week is they have to enter comments about this week's lecture. So you have to give some feedback or some comments, or make a comment on one of the other students' assignments. And one of my students last semester was obviously using ChatGPT or another program like that to just generate generic content that they cut and
Yeah.
paste into the comments section. And there's no grade on that, so I had to give them credit for that. But it was obvious that they hadn't thought about anything, and they just had a bunch of generic gobbledygook in there that made complete sentences but didn't really say anything. The fact that they didn't know that it didn't say anything and they entered it anyway is the most disturbing part of the exercise, right? So I think that that's maybe one of the dangers you're talking about, is if we just take the notes that we get, or the content that we're getting, and put it into these systems and get a bunch of content back, we won't know. We'll lose the ability to know if it's good or not, right? So that
That's
we
right.
stop
That's
to
right.
think about it. But it's tempting. It's tempting to get all this stuff back and make it easy to just put out some new stuff, isn't it?
I mean, it's super tempting, and I think that's why it's so challenging to circumnavigate. Because if you think about it, even back to like my high school experience and all of our youths, right? Cliff Notes, right? It's just sort of like Cliff Notes on steroids now. Like
Yeah.
if you didn't want to read the book, you read the Cliff Notes, and then you fumbled through the book report, and that it wasn't okay then, right? It's still not okay to not be able to exercise that critical thinking and judgment. And it also makes these assistive technologies way less effective, because their purpose isn't to think for us. Their purpose is to help us be more efficient in how we formulate our own thoughts,
Hmm.
right? They're prompts, they're the foundation for an idea. It helps sometimes, as a writer, it's always easier to edit than it is to write fresh. So, every time you have writer's block or you just don't know where to start, I just start writing something, because as soon as I put words down on the page, even if they're not super well organized, even if they're not saying exactly what I wanted to say, I've got a canvas now. I've got, a lump of clay to mold, and then I can go from there. And that, I think, is ideally the what I would envision to be the right scenario for chat gpt and AI generated marketing emails and things of that nature, right? Just like a basic starting point that you can then customize and iterate on and make your own. Because if you send them out exactly as they are, I don't know if this is true for the vast majority of consumers. I do know it's true for me. I can tell when something's generally AI created, because it hurts my brain a little bit. It feels like I'm stepping into the uncanny valley. There's something around it where it's just trying to approximate how a human being would express themselves without quite nailing it. Like the image that has 6 fingers or like 10 fingers or something, right, in a hand. While there are probably human beings who have that for certain, that's not the typical statistically prevalent example of how fingers look. So it's just interesting to try to balance the beauty and power of these incredible technologies and what type of potential they unlock for us, but also realize that our greatest strength is that authentic judgment and willingness to know what we should trust and what we should not. And a great illustration of that is Reddit and its popularity now, right? Reddit has, while a lot of social networks are sort of flagging and stagnating or receding in usage, Reddit is exploding precisely because people like the fact that it's human generated content.
Mm.
It's real people having real discussions. I mean, granted, I'm sure there's an infiltration of bots on there too, but for the most part, what made it rise to its popularity was those authentic human conversations convened in a singular place. And so when people want advice, they want to go hear somebody's real lived experience. There's such power and value in that lived experience that you cannot get from a random approximation that is generic.
So we can't really, we'd be wrong, I should say, to replace things that, require human judgment, discernment, creativity. You use the example of like songwriting or writing in general. If we're replacing all of that with AI, we're really losing something essential
Mm-hmm.
in humanity. And it's going to take away our ability to think and our ability to be creative and an ability to use those this judgment, that those critical thinking skills that we really need. I was trying to make the analogy, and I've used this analogy with other people, about spreadsheets. And just
Sure.
think, hey, maybe I'm being too much of a luddite here, and I really, hey, when spreadsheets came around, I didn't keep using a calculator. I put things in spreadsheets, and it was much easier, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it automated. But spreadsheets, as I thought about it, kind of gave the ability to do whole other things that calculators couldn't do. It's not just about adding the number, it's about creating these models and these systems that I couldn't do. Is there a thing in AI that we can see, at least at these early days, that it could help enhance our creativity or enhance our critical thinking skills rather than kind of replace them? Is there a place that it could help us get to?
Absolutely. I mean, the degree of accuracy, scale, and volume that AI models can unleash are transformative. And the use cases, and again, I wouldn't say I'm a Luddite. Some people might describe me that way. And I would certainly say I'm a skeptic about so many things. I think that's just who I am. The thing that I'm not skeptical about, or the thing that really gives me a tremendous amount of excitement and hope, is the application of artificial intelligence on solving problems that plague humanity as a whole. And among those are, I mean, diagnostics for healthcare, I would say, is the first example that comes to mind. The idea of medical science being in some ways very decentralized. So if you think about it, you're going to your general practitioner because you have some sort of pain or you have a unique problem. In this case, medicine can be generalized, right? Because it is evidence based. And first, do no harm. So you don't want to take any chances on assuming something is an edge case. Most likely, it's Occam's razor, and it's the most obvious possibility is the probable possibility, right? Um, and we're especially in the U.S. I mean, the volume of patients does not match the volume of providers we have. It's difficult sometimes to get seen in a timely fashion. And there is such stress being placed on healthcare professionals, and the rate of burnout is high, and they have such a thankless job. It's really difficult to sometimes scale the idea of like, how do we find out what's really wrong? And the amount of data that is publicly available in medical journals and databases and all sorts of examples, like I just think if I were to come in with something that seemed very difficult to diagnose or just I couldn't figure it out and I'd seen specialist after specialist and nobody could figure it out. I mean, I imagine an AI model, if it could scan all the medical literature available, would probably find somebody else who's had that diagnosis and then could do a compare and contrast. I mean, from the vantage point of radiology and studying x-rays and, identifying early onset cancers, like these are all use cases that get me tremendously excited. This can save lives, right? I think that there are applications from a legal perspective in scouring case law, right? Large pattern matching opportunities to figure out from perhaps like an epidemiological perspective. Where are there, hot points across the world for emergence of diseases and potential epidemics and things of that nature. How can we collaborate on a globalized level to combat problems? I think that there's a huge amount of opportunity to help humanity, and that AI can play a tremendous role in doing that. I'm much more excited about those types of applications than I am about, like, can it write an email for me or can it manage my calendar?
Right.
I don't find writing emails and managing my calendar to be things that keep me up at night.
Right. Yeah. So it's a different kind of thing. But I definitely see what you're saying about it could really help us solve some of the big problems in the world. But let's bring this back to marketing. So are there
Sure.
some analogies in marketing or applications in marketing that you're starting to see that are worth solving through AI? That, how could AI help marketers today without just replacing some of the core creative tasks that we're doing?
Right. I think that the key word here is assistant.
Hmm.
And where it can be truly assistive and almost be an administrative assistant, for lack of a better term, I think that opens up a lot of possibilities. A great example of this, and it's not necessarily marketing, but it also kind of incorporates some elements of marketing, is around customer experience
Hmm.
and just the importance of responsiveness. So we did a lot of research on this at previous companies around, would a candidate for a job be willing to engage with a chatbot rather than a recruiter if it meant that they would get a quicker response? And the answer was yes, that they were willing to not only engage with the chatbot, but, charmingly, they were even polite to the chatbot. They were saying please and thank you, because it can be such a demoralizing task to apply for a job, that just the idea of giving somebody the dignity of an immediate response is a huge morale booster
Hmm.
and can keep them more engaged in the process, while also freeing up recruiters from having to necessarily be in 15 places at once. I mean, there aren't enough hours in the day for somebody to respond to every single candidate in a thoughtful fashion, right? Or even to answer them at the first ring. What if you're not at your desk, et cetera, right? So I think that there's a lot of possibility from a customer service standpoint, just getting people exactly what they need early on, and then pathing the more complicated cases directly to a person, as long as it's done thoughtfully and it's not buggy. I mean, you go on some chatbots are really quite poor, and you just feel like you're in a phone tree, right? You're just being tossed around, and that's a terrible experience.
Yeah.
But understanding which layers to automate, right, and which layers to leave to the people.
Yeah, I just had to sign up for cable TV and internet service and kind of caught in a chatbot loop, and it was super painful. So I know what that is. But yeah, I think there's definitely some great applications in customer service, and chatbots are a great one in that. I really like the application of the virtual assistant too, and I've been trying to practice myself that. So I've been doing some work this week on strategy, kind of think about target markets and doing analysis
Mhm.
on where my agency should go and where we should focus. And it was just very helpful to kind of go from very quickly to what are the best segments in these different markets, to getting detail on those segments, to getting data on those segments, and kind of getting through that whole process in minutes rather than in days, by if I had to search and go to primary sources and get all that data. So I think there are a lot of applications in the virtual assistant or the on the research side that could be really
Mhm.
helpful to marketers. But then putting all that together in strategy, do we want to put all that into somewhere and have it give us the strategy? That seems a little crazy to me, right? So, and yet that's one of the primary applications that I see in AI literature, is like it can create the strategy. And I'm not sure that that makes any sense to me.
Yeah, I call it into question. I mean, I again, there's my putting my skeptics hat on. I don't like it. I think that I'd like to think of AI as an intern, a smart intern,
Mhm.
but the intern doesn't have the judgment, wisdom, experience, or school of hard knocks to be able to say what the strategy ought to be. And I think that if you're relying on current tools for that, I call into question if potentially you have the wisdom to be dictating the strategy, right? That seems like there's a lot of risk there, in an environment where you really don't want to be introducing that type of risk. There was an interesting Business Insider article that actually came out just today or yesterday, where they interviewed an anonymous CMO, certainly wasn't me, around their practical experience with various AI-driven marketing tools. And if I recall correctly, it was like a advertising planning, like almost like a AI generated DSP. There was AI generated email tools, so like ChatGPT for writing marketing emails. And I'm I think I'm getting this right, but it worked for that particular purpose. It worked well 60% of the time, and then 40% of the time it generated emails that were unusable.
Hmm.
And so if you were to take it at face value without checking the quality of that work, then you would be in a world of hurt. And this particular anonymous CMO said that while the 60% of the cases in which the email was great were very valuable and excellent, and good ROI, they ultimately had to stop using the tool because the 40% of cases in which they generated really poor emails were jeopardizing customer relationships.
Hmm.
So then it goes into, again, is it the AI tool's fault, or is it the human team's responsibility to be able to really thoughtfully and critically check over the quality of that work to make sure that it meets the moment and addresses a specific problem that we are trying to solve?
Yeah.
If the problem is increasing efficiency, fantastic. But the problem isn't to think for us and assume that they understand the ICP better than we do.
If you can't tell the difference between the intern and the manager doesn't belong probably in that job. I just had a conversation with
That's
a
right.
potential client this week, and the president of the company is a small company. Didn't really understand marketing that well. They hired a junior marketing person and said, "Hey, figure it out. Here's a budget. Go do whatever you like. Make it happen. We trust you. Go happen." And this was, her first job, and she's just kind of making stuff happen. A year goes by. She spends $100,000. They paid her a bunch of money. Nothing happened, surprisingly. And so I think that that's what happens when you take effective tools. She was doing a lot of stuff, but if you don't have an efficient strategy, if you don't know the most important things to do, and that's what takes judgment and experience and creativity. It takes that in marketing to really produce really good outcomes. So if you outsource all of that to AI, be careful, right? So you might get something, but it's a little bit dangerous. You'll get a lot of good content, but will it be achieving the objective?
Well, what I think is going to happen as a result of this strong proclivity that the vast majority of people have for relying on these tools to take over some of these tasks is that we're going to start to see a premium being placed on something that is more authentic and organic.
Hmm.
And an example of that, again, because I'm a musician, is the fascination with vinyl records now, which completely went out of fashion for a long time and is now coming back into fashion. And the reason for that is people want something tangible. There is a visceral reaction that you feel not just when listening, but also, I think, in your heart when you go up to a turntable and you flip the record over to
Hmm.
the other side and you're listening to an album from start to finish the way its creator had intended you to, and you're not skipping around. And there are some imperfections to the sound as it's coming out through the speakers. You can hear an occasional scratch, you can hear some feedback, and it makes it more human. That imperfection is, in its own way, a type of perfection because it soothes something, in you, right? It brings out emotion. It's like a chord change. I see that happening from a marketing vantage point as well. The impact that we see from obviously, I mean, we create reference software, so that's human generated insight, and people really love it because it's trustworthy. But also, just even like when I send a handwritten thank you note,
Hmm.
when somebody receives something in the mail that they can touch, right? When they see somebody's unvarnished opinion of something in a video, right? Like, while video can obviously, be AI generated, and that brings up a whole host of different conversations to have. Um, for the most part, I would say the vast majority of people believe that that video right now is authentic. So if you look at somebody in a video clip, for instance, or in an audio clip, you want to trust that for the most part, right? Unless given credible reason not to. That, I think, celebrates something, and that's why podcasting is popular now. I mean, podcasting is sort of like the modern interpretation of radio,
Hmm.
right? We have that appetite as human beings to want to listen to something and just hear a real conversation happening between two or more people. And we actually have more patience than I think we acknowledge or give ourselves credit for. I mean, my kids are young, and so I bought the first season of Sesame Street to show them. I think it was from the late '60s because I wanted them to see sort of what I grew up watching. And they were engaged in it, but they were also just a little bored because I forgot just how slow paced it looks by comparison to today's cartoons and children's entertainment. And so I was like, oh, that's really sad. But I do think also there's some things for them that it doesn't change. Like, they can listen to music that I enjoyed listening to, and it's exactly the same. Like, it they love it. They appreciate it. And so, to the point of the importance of critical thinking, I think it's also important to realize that while we have a tremendous appetite for progress and for advancement and transformation, I think there's also some things that we just enjoy doing from an experiential perspective, and we should just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's very powerful. So focus on things that you enjoy, that enhance your creativity and your critical thinking, discernment, all of those very human skills, and avoid letting AI take that away from you, is it sounds like what you're saying. If you had to kind of summarize maybe some good advice for marketers in this new age,
Mm,
what would you say?
yeah, that's well, I think that it's very important for marketers, especially those that are early in their careers, because the environment for training has fundamentally changed, right? I mean, even just since COVID lockdowns, right? How we operate as a function has changed. I would highly encourage them to embrace learning through hands-on experience and do it manually in order to appreciate what it feels like to do it with the help of automation or, on the other side of that continuum, AI, right? I think it's really important to know and to appreciate the power of technology by understanding what it felt like to not have it,
Mm.
right? An example of that is when I was in my early days of PR, uh, we didn't do anything with software solutions. Like, I had to go in a back room in a giant, I remember at Cone, in a giant room with all these magazine clippings. When we secured coverage for a client, it was in a magazine or a newspaper. It was the print edition. And so I went out and I had to capture the clips, and I'd have a giant binder, and I would take an X-Acto knife and I would cut out the article, and I would take a glue stick and I would glue it, and I'd have to be perfectly detailed in how I put it centered in the page, because that was important with the byline and the date line and the headline. And then I would put it all together in this beautiful binder, make sure it was perfectly dry and nicely laminated, and I would package it up and I would mail it to the clients.
Mm.
And that's long gone. Nobody does that. Nobody even gets print coverage for the most part. Um, but that helped me appreciate doing it online then. And then that helped me appreciate how easy it is now to track coverage with all these media databases and different solutions like because I was able to experience what it was like to do it manually and how time consuming and painstaking that process was, I so much more appreciate and also have the right degree, I hope, of judgment to know when something feels off, because I'm so familiar with what a trustworthy, credible, and accurate piece of information and well reported
Mm.
information looks like. That, my spidey senses tingle when
Yeah.
I see something that doesn't seem right.
Rather than taking everything that comes up in the search engine as or the
Face
AI
value.
search as face value. Yeah, that's very powerful. The other thing that struck me from that conversation is that you knew the value of giving the client that information was important enough for you to spend time getting all of those clips. And the fact that you did that, the client read that, means it had value. Well, Vinda, this has been a really amazing conversation. You've put together some really great insights here. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk about AI and humanity and what it's all going to do to us. If people want to reach out to you, learn more about you or your company, or just interact with you on this topic, what's the best way for them to do that?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Well, I live in the Boston area, so I'm always up for grabbing a coffee. And I'm an extrovert, if you couldn't tell. So that'd be a fantastic opportunity for me to leave my house. But also, I'm on LinkedIn, Vinda Souza. Just look me up. Feel free to send me a connection request. I'd be excited to continue the conversation with anyone who wants to have one.
Great. Thanks again for joining today.
All right. Thanks, Dave.